My name is Margaret Lawson, but everyone calls me Maggie. I'm 68 years old, a retired accountant who spent 40 years balancing other people's numbers. I used to believe that if you stayed organized and decent, life would pay you back in kind. I was wrong. The chapter opens with the sound of suitcase wheels grinding over gravel. I was dragging 2 heavy suitcases down the front steps of the White House, where my son once lived, the same house where we'd laughed over Sunday dinners, where I'd planted marigolds along the fence. Yesterday I buried him. Behind me on the porch, Lydia, my daughter-in-law, stood with folded arms, still wearing the black dress from the funeral. Her voice was flat, almost businesslike. "This house is mine now." The wind carried the smell of fresh lilies from the wreath that still hung on the door. I stopped, turned to her, and tried to find a trace of the woman my son had loved. There was nothing left but calculation. Voiceover. The flowers on my son's grave were still fresh, and I was already homeless. At the funeral, people whispered softly passing tissues and murmured condolences. The church was packed. Ethan had been well liked. I sat in the front pew, hands clasped, trying to breathe through the ache in my chest. Lydia sat beside me, head bowed, shoulders trembling. The nurse looked from the clipboard to me and asked if I was the nanny. But when I glanced sideways, I caught her checking the time on her gold wristwatch, tapping her phone under the hymn book. Mrs. Dawson, my old neighbor, leaned over and whispered, "She's handling it so well." I smiled politely, but inside I heard my son's voice echoing from years ago. "Mom, she's just under a lot of pressure. Give her time." Time had just run out. At the reception afterward, the air smelled of coffee, perfume, and grief. Guests approached with polite sympathy. "You raised such a good man," they said. "He adored you." I nodded, thanked them, and watched Lydia glide from group to group, greeting people like the hostess of a charity gala. Back in the present, the sky was beginning to bruise with evening light. The house behind me looked smaller, now emptier. I could still hear Ethan's laugh in the walls, his boots by the door, the sound of him saying, "You'll always have a place here, Mom." Apparently not. I pulled my cardigan tighter and started toward the driveway. That's when a beat-up blue sedan screeched to a halt beside me. Out popped Sandra, my oldest friend, and the only person in town who could make grief sound like a sitcom. "Good Lord, Maggie," she huffed, stepping out in her oversized sunglasses. "You look like you're fleeing a crime scene. Tell me she didn't." "She did," I said. Sandra opened her mouth, closed it again, then grabbed the handle of one suitcase. "Well, at least she's consistent, always taking things that aren't hers." I almost laughed, which felt like a sin so soon after the funeral. She popped the trunk and tried to help me load my luggage, but in the process, the bag of leftover funeral sandwiches tipped over and exploded across the gravel egg salad ham tuna, all in one tragic mayonnaise-colored landslide. Sandra gasped. "Oh, for heaven's sake, guess we're feeding the raccoons tonight." I stared at the mess, then at her face, and for the first time in days, a small ridiculous laugh slipped out. It sounded foreign, shaky, but real. I'm standing there half laughing, half crying, a widow with egg salad on her shoes. Voiceover. They thought I'd beg. Instead, I started counting receipts. Later that evening, I checked into a roadside motel off Route 7. The room smelled faintly of disinfectant and air freshener, fighting a losing battle. A faded landscape painting hung crooked above the bed. I placed my suitcases by the dresser and sat down on the stiff mattress. Outside, the neon sign blinked vacancy in weary red letters. I reached into my purse and pulled out my old leather notebook, the one I used for grocery lists and tax calculations, and began writing. Expenses. Motel room, $79.99, plus tax. Dinner vending machine chips, $175. Remaining savings, $4,862. It wasn't much, but the pen tapped twice. The math lined up. My pulse did too. They made sense when people didn't. My hands trembled slightly as I wrote the next line. Then, almost without thinking, I reached into my coat pocket. My fingers brushed against a smooth metal pen the silver Parker Ethan had given me on my 65th birthday. I clicked it once. The sound echoed softly in the quiet room. Somewhere in the distance, a train horn wailed long and low. I stared at the ceiling and whispered to no one in particular. "All right, Maggie. Time to balance one last ledger." 5 years earlier, the air still smelled like fresh paint and new beginnings. Ethan and Lydia stood in the middle of the empty living room, sunlight pouring through wide windows onto the polished oak floor. The realtor had just handed them the keys, and Lydia was already talking about wall colors and furniture layouts. "Gray and white," she said, running a manicured hand along the baseboard. "Clean, modern, no clutter." Ethan smiled at her enthusiasm, but his eyes turned to me, standing in the doorway with a check folded neatly inside my purse. I remember the weight of that check, $50,000. My entire retirement cushion, half of what my husband and I had saved before he passed. "It's just a loan," I told Ethan when I gave it to him that morning. "Temporary help so you two can start without a mountain of interest." He'd looked guilty. "Mom will pay you back as soon as we're settled." "I know you will," I said, and I meant it. Ethan had always been good with numbers, honest to a fault. Lydia loved appearances more than arithmetic. As we stood in that empty house, she turned to me, her smile polite but tight. "You really didn't have to, Maggie. We could have figured it out." "I wanted to," I said simply. "It's good to see you two build something of your own." Inside, I promised myself I'd never mention the money again. But I still made sure to keep a copy of the bank transfer and the little handwritten note Ethan insisted on writing, "Temporary loan, repayable upon sale or refinance of property." He even signed and dated it. I tucked it into my personal file next to birth certificates and old tax returns. Old accountants never lose their habits. The following months blurred into domestic routine. Lydia worked part-time at a design boutique. Ethan handled construction projects downtown. I moved into the small guest room temporarily just until we settled, Lydia had said. Somehow, temporary became permanent. I cooked dinner most nights, kept the house tidy, and walked their golden retriever, Benny, every morning. Lydia didn't like dog hair on the furniture, so I brushed him outside. Sometimes when she came home early, she'd see me at the table reconciling bills or tracking expenses on a notepad. "You still do everything by hand?" she asked one evening, her voice light but laced with mockery. "You know there's an app for that." I smiled. "I know, but my pen never needs charging." She laughed, then muttered as she walked away. "So outdated, still writes checks." I chuckled to myself. She wasn't wrong. Most people her age lived on direct deposit and mobile transfers. But I wasn't most people. Later, when Ethan came home, she repeated the joke, "Your mom's adorable." She still balances the budget on paper. Ethan, bless him, tried to defend me. "Mom could run circles around half my office when it comes to finances." I winked at him. "I balance million-dollar budgets for 40 years, but somehow she thinks I can't handle a toaster." He laughed, but Lydia just smiled thinly and poured herself a glass of wine. Despite the small frictions, I liked helping them. There was a certain quiet joy in watching your child build a life. Ethan always asked for my advice before signing anything important. Lydia, on the other hand, preferred to decorate rather than discuss interest rates. When the first property tax bill arrived, she slid it across the table to me like a dirty dish. "Can you check if this looks right?" I did, of course. She never thanked me, but Ethan did every time. When their first anniversary rolled around, I surprised them with a framed photo of the house the day they bought it. Lydia frowned at the frame. Oh, this clashes with the living room palette. So much for sentiment. Still, there were good moments. Ethan and I would watch baseball together on quiet Sunday nights, while Lydia scrolled through her phone, posting photos of our beautiful home online. Sometimes I'd catch her captions, "Hard work pays off." I wondered if she ever remembered whose savings had started that hard work. 2 years later, when Ethan was promoted to project lead, he insisted on taking me out for dinner. "We couldn't have done this without you, Mom." At the restaurant, he raised his glass. "To the woman who keeps our finances and my sanity intact." Lydia smiled for the camera flash, then whispered, "Let's not make a habit of mentioning the money. It's a bit private." Private. That was her word for everything she didn't want people to know. I let it go. I always did. The house itself became a mirror of their marriage, tidy on the surface, cracks underneath. Lydia's obsession with appearance grew designer curtains, imported tiles, endless remodels. Ethan worked longer hours to keep up. I'd hear them argue at night, muffled but sharp. "Once I caught the tail end of it, we wouldn't even have this place if it weren't for her," Ethan said. "Exactly," Lydia snapped. "So maybe she should move out now that she's had her sentimental moment." I pretended not to hear. Instead, I baked muffins for breakfast the next morning and set out 3 cups of coffee as always. When Ethan left for work, he hugged me and whispered, "Don't mind her. She just wants space." I nodded, even though I knew space wasn't what she wanted. She wanted control. That spring, I found myself reorganizing some old files. Out of habit, I checked the folder labeled E&L Mortgage 2019. Inside, still crisp and clean, was the photocopy of my $50,000 transfer and Ethan's signed note. For a moment, I ran my fingers over the ink, remembering the pride in his eyes when he'd said, "We'll pay it back, Mom." I smiled then, not because I needed the money back, but because that paper was proof of something I couldn't quite name. Maybe love, maybe fairness, maybe just a record that once before the pretending began, we had all been honest. I slid the folder back into the drawer, locked it, and tucked the key into my pocket. I didn't know it then, but that single piece of paper, the quiet evidence of good faith, would one day be the only thing standing between truth and ruin. The night it happened, the air felt unnaturally still. The clock on my nightstand glowed 3:17 a.m. when my phone rang, its vibration rattling against the wood like a warning. Half asleep, I reached for it, expecting maybe a wrong number or a weather alert. But when I saw Ethan's name, my heart jolted awake. "Mom." His voice was hoarse, shallow, broken between breaths. My chest hurts. Then static, a groan, and silence. "Ethan." I sat up straight. Ethan talked to me. "Where are you?" But there was nothing, just the long, flat tone of a dropped call. I didn't even put on shoes. I grabbed my coat, my car keys, and the emergency file folder I kept on the counter, the one with medical records and insurance cards, because an old accountant never leaves things to chance. The drive to St. Mary's Hospital felt endless, the roads eerily empty, street lights slicing through fog like searchlights in a war zone. Every red light felt like an insult. Every second I prayed, please let him be okay. Just one more chance. When I burst through the ER doors, a nurse looked up from the desk. "Name Ethan Reeves," I panted. "My son." He called me. He said his chest hurt. Her expression softened. She gestured toward a hallway. "Please wait in the family room, ma'am. The doctor will come speak with you soon." That sentence, "the doctor will come speak with you soon," should be a universal omen. It never means good news. I sat alone under fluorescent lights that hummed louder than my thoughts. The walls were pale green, the kind of color they must think is calming. It isn't. After what felt like hours, though, It couldn't have been more than 20 minutes. A man in scrubs walked in, holding a clipboard he didn't seem to want to read from. Mrs. Reeves! I stood up so fast the chair screeched against the tile. Yes, that's me. How's my son? He hesitated. Then he said it clinically gently like he'd said it 100 times before. Massive heart attack. We did everything we could. The words hit me before I could understand them. Massive heart attack. We did everything we could. The world went quiet. My knees went weak, but somehow I didn't fall. He kept talking something about timing CPR, no response, but I couldn't hear it. All I could see was my little boy, 10 years old, riding his bike without training wheels, for the first time turning back to make sure I was still watching. I had been watching then, but I wasn't now. When I finally made it to the small consultation room, Lydia was already there. She sat perfectly posed legs, crossed hands, pressed against her face, as if for a magazine photo of grief. A single tear rolled down her cheek, almost too perfectly timed. I reached for her shoulder. "Oh, sweetheart." She flinched, just slightly, then exhaled. He just collapsed," she whispered. "One minute he was fine the next." Her voice broke, but her eyes didn't. For a second, I caught something behind them. Not sorrow, not shock. Something quieter. Something like relief. And then it was gone. Maybe it was my imagination. Maybe I was just grasping at shadows. But that flicker lodged itself in my chest and refused to leave. An hour later, a nurse brought in paperwork. Next of kin needs to sign the release forms. Lydia reached out, immediately manicured nails flashing under the fluorescent light. "That's me." The nurse nodded, handed her the clipboard, then turned to me with a polite smile. "And you are the nanny." For a second, I thought I'd misheard. "I'm his mother." The nurse blinked, startled. "Oh, I'm so sorry. Mrs. Reeves signed as the next of kin, so I assumed." "Don't worry," I said softly. "You're not the first." It was true. Somewhere between Lydia's wedding photos and social media posts about her little family, the nurse looked from the clipboard to me and asked if I was the nanny. I watched Lydia sign her name, Lydia Reeves, in smooth, confident cursive, the same way she'd claimed everything else. His home, his time, his image, now even his death. I waited until the sun began to rise before leaving. The hospital corridors were cold, washed in sterile blue light. A janitor mopped near the vending machine, humming off-key. Outside, the dawn was gray, the kind of dawn that doesn't promise anything. I sat in my car and looked at my reflection in the rearview mirror. My eyes were dry, my face pale. I thought I would cry, but I didn't. Instead, I felt hollow. When I finally started the engine, the radio came on by accident, some morning host laughing about traffic. I turned it off. Silence was better. Halfway home, I realized I hadn't even asked about his personal effects. His watch, his phone, his wedding ring. I turned the car around, but halfway back I stopped again. What was I going to do? Ask permission from the woman who had already signed away my place in his life. Later that morning, when I stood in the kitchen where Ethan used to drink his coffee before work, I noticed the mug he'd left behind. A small ring of dried coffee at the bottom. I touched it with my finger, tracing the shape. The house was silent except for the faint hum of the refrigerator. Even Benny the dog seemed to sense something irreversible. He lay by the back door, head on his paws, eyes dull. On the counter, the mortgage folder still sat where I'd left it last week. I picked it up, brushing off a thin layer of dust. Inside, Ethan's handwriting stared back at me. Temporary loan, repayable upon sale or refinance. He'd signed it carefully, like someone who planned to honor his word. I ran my thumb along the ink and whispered, "You always kept your promises." Then I looked around the spotless kitchen that Lydia called her space and felt a strange chill crawl up my spine. Somehow, I knew this wasn't just the end of Ethan's life. I slid the mortgage note into a fresh folder and locked the drawer. The key stayed in my fist. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying that phone call, that half sentence over and over. "Mom, my chest hurts. If only I had called sooner. If only I had insisted he get checked. If only, if only." At 3:17 a.m., the next night I found myself staring at the clock again, waiting for a phone that would never ring. Voiceover. That was the moment I realized how invisible I'd become in my own family. I was the mother who paid the down payment, the woman who cooked the meals, the one who stayed quiet so everyone else could feel comfortable. And still, when the time came, they forgot I was even there. The light from the digital clock flickered against the wall, marking another sleepless hour. Somewhere in that silence, I made a quiet promise to myself. If Lydia wanted to erase me, she was going to find out just how hard it is to delete a woman who remembers everything. The funeral was small, quiet, and mercifully short. Ethan's co-workers said kind words, the pastor said scripted ones, and Lydia said nothing at all. She just cried in neat, camera-ready sobs that stopped the moment the crowd dispersed. By the time the last car pulled away, the air outside was still heavy with lilies and rain. I was gathering dishes in the kitchen when Lydia appeared in the doorway. Her eyes were dry now, her voice crisp and businesslike. "Let's talk like adults, Maggie." I nodded, wiping my hands on a towel. "Of course." She gestured to the table, the same one where we used to have family dinners, Ethan at the head, laughing the three of us, pretending to be something like a family. But today the table felt like a courtroom. Lydia didn't sit. She crossed her arms and said it plainly like she'd practiced in the mirror. "This house is in Ethan's name, which means legally it's mine now. I need the space to process everything. You'll have to move out." I stared at her, not because I was shocked I wasn't, but because she said process everything like she was talking about closing an Excel file. "How long are you giving me?" I asked. She adjusted the strap of her black dress eyes steady. 24 hours should be enough. You don't have that much stuff." It was efficient cruelty, delivered like a memo. For a moment, I said nothing. Then I nodded. "All right." Her brows furrowed, maybe expecting a scene. "That's it. You're not going to argue. No point. You've already decided." She tilted her head as if studying me like a problem that didn't compute. I reached for the kettle, poured myself a cup of tea, and said evenly, "Would you like me to leave the family recipes? You seem to like the lasagna." Her lips twitched, not quite a smile, not quite a sneer. "No, thank you. I prefer delivery." I figured I said and took a sip. By noon, I was upstairs folding clothes into suitcases. It was strange how quickly a home could shrink down to 4 bags and 2 boxes. I'd packed the same way before when Ethan went to college, when I sold my own house to help him buy this one, when life changed faster than I was ready for. Downstairs, I heard voices, Lydia on the phone, her tone brisk and clipped, probably calling the realtor or maybe the insurance company. Then came a knock at the door. Sandra stood there, my oldest friend, clutching a casserole dish in one hand and a roll of garbage bags in the other. "Oh, honey," she sighed, looking past me into the half-empty room. "I heard from Pastor Tom. Said you're moving out already." I nodded, forcing a smile. Apparently, I've exceeded the grief occupancy limit. Sandra shook her head, muttering something about heartless women with manicures, and started helping me pack. We worked in silence for a while. She folded my sweaters while I wrapped picture frames in old newspapers. Occasionally, she'd try to make me laugh, but her voice kept trembling. Then, as she sealed a box, she blurted without thinking, "Well, at least she didn't charge you rent." I froze. Then we both burst out laughing, the kind of laugh that's half hysteria, half survival. "Give her time," I said. "She might send me an invoice for emotional labor." Sandra snorted. "I'd pay to see you send her a tax form in return." By evening, the house was spotless again, stripped of every trace of me. I stood in the doorway one last time, the smell of lemon cleaner hanging heavy in the air. Lydia appeared behind me, leaning casually against the banister. She'd changed into yoga pants and a silk blouse, morning apparently had a dress code. "All packed." I nodded. "Yes." "I left your spare key on the counter." "Good." She glanced at the clock as if timing me. Then she added with the sweet poison only Lydia could manage, "You know, Maggie, you really should have saved more for retirement." The word slid out so effortlessly it almost sounded like advice. I turned, met her gaze, and smiled a calm, knowing smile that made her blink. "Funny you say that," I said, lifting my suitcase, "because Ethan already did." For a moment, confusion flickered in her eyes. Just a flicker, but enough. Then I walked out, pulling the door shut behind me. The night air was cool, the sky pale gray. Sandra's car idled by the curb, its trunk open, my boxes stacked neatly inside. As we drove away, I looked back through the rear window. The porch light flickered once the same bulb Ethan had been meaning to fix. Somewhere deep down, I felt the ache of every unfinished thing between us. But beneath the grief, something steadier began to form. Not anger, not bitterness, just resolve. Voiceover. She thought she'd won. She took the house. She thought that was everything. But she forgot one thing. Ethan wasn't just her husband. He was my son. And long before he left, he made sure I'd never be left behind. The motel sign ahead flickered vacancy in buzzing red neon. Sandra parked and turned to me. "You gonna be okay tonight?" I smiled, weary but certain. "I've handled audits tougher than this." She laughed softly, handed me a thermos of tea, and drove off. I stood under the neon light suitcase in hand, watching her car disappear into the night. Then I looked up at the faint glow of the moon and whispered almost to Ethan, "Don't worry, sweetheart. You always kept your promises. Now it's my turn." 2 weeks passed. 2 long, gray, motel-smelling weeks. The wallpaper in my room was peeling. The carpet was older than I was, and the coffee from the lobby machine tasted like it had lived 3 past lives. But it was quiet. Quiet enough to think, to grieve, and to plan. I'd gotten used to the rhythm wake up, take Benny for a walk check job listings for no reason, and stare at the motel ceiling wondering how someone could go from homeowner to temporary tenant in less than a month. Then one Thursday morning, my phone buzzed. The caller ID read Howard Briggs, attorney at law. For a moment, I thought it was a mistake. Briggs had been Ethan's lawyer for years, property paperwork, tax filings, contracts. I hadn't heard from him since the house closing. I answered, "Mr. Briggs." His voice was warm but formal, like a man used to delivering both good and bad news. "Mrs. Whitmore, good morning. I'm reaching out regarding your son's estate. We'll be conducting the formal reading of his will this coming Tuesday at 2 p.m. I'd like you to be present." I blinked at the cracked motel ceiling. "Oh, well, I wasn't expecting that. Lydia's handling all of his affairs." "Yes," he said carefully, "but your presence is also required. Ethan made specific provisions that concern you. Specific provisions." Those 2 words landed like a stone in my chest. I see I managed. Probably just his watch, or some old photo albums. "I'd still suggest you attend," Mr. Briggs said. "There are details best explained in person." After he hung up, I sat there for a moment staring at my reflection in the motel's warped mirror. It wasn't grief that stirred in me this time. It was curiosity, quiet, careful curiosity with a pulse. That afternoon, Sandra stopped by with sandwiches and her usual hurricane of commentary. "You look like you saw a ghost." "What happened?" Ethan's lawyer called. "There's a will reading next week." She dropped her sandwich mid-bite. A will reading. "Oh, honey, that's not nothing." I shrugged. "It's probably sentimental." "Maybe he left me his watch." Sandra smirked. "Or maybe he left you the dog." "Don't laugh. I once knew a guy whose uncle left his entire estate to a cat." "Lucky cat," I said, half smiling. "Maybe you're the lucky one," she teased, wagging a finger. "Wouldn't it be poetic justice if Lydia had to sit there and watch you inherit the lawn furniture?" I chuckled. "Trust me, I'm not expecting miracles. Just closure." Tuesday came faster than I wanted. The office of Briggs & Miller sat in a refurbished Victorian downtown dark wood panels, brass fixtures, and the faint scent of lemon polish. The kind of place where even grief had to behave. I wore my navy dress, the one Ethan always said made me look reliable. I wanted to feel reliable again. When I walked into the waiting room, Lydia was already there in a fitted black designer dress, pearls gleaming under the light. Beside her sat a man I didn't recognize, early 40s, sharp suit, same eyes. Her brother, of course. Lydia's smile was pure frost. "Oh, Maggie, I didn't realize you were invited." "Apparently, Ethan did," I said, taking the seat farthest from her. Her brother leaned over and whispered something that made her smirk. Mr. Briggs entered right on time, carrying a thick envelope. He greeted us politely, shaking hands in the solemn way lawyers do when they're about to unspool someone's legacy. "Thank you both for coming," he said, settling behind his mahogany desk. "This won't take long." Lydia straightened her posture, one leg crossed neatly over the other, her perfume so strong it made the air feel expensive. The will reading began formally, assets, property accounts. Lydia nodded along, chin high, satisfied. "To my wife, Lydia Whitmore." Mr. Briggs read, "I leave the residence at 184 Maple Grove, the joint savings accounts, and all personal property contained therein." Lydia's smile widened. She turned to her brother and whispered loud enough for me to hear, "Told you. I made sure she gets nothing." Her words sliced through the air, sharp and deliberate. I stared at the polished floor, breathing through it. But then, the sound that changed everything. Mr. Briggs cleared his throat. "There is, however, one final section." The room stilled. Even the ticking clock on the wall seemed to pause. Lydia's laughter faded mid-breath. Mr. Briggs uncapped his silver pen, the kind that clicks loud enough to echo. Click. Freeze frame. That single sound hung in the air, charged with something electric, a promise that what came next would rewrite everything we thought we knew. The moment Mr. Briggs clicked his silver pen, the room fell into a silence thick enough to hear a heartbeat. He adjusted his glasses, unfolded a second page from the will, and said evenly, "Mr. Whitmore made an addendum 3 months before his passing. It includes instructions regarding a personal safety deposit box held at First National Bank. The contents are to be released solely to his mother, Mrs. Margaret Whitmore." Lydia's head snapped toward him. What box? Ethan never mentioned any box. Briggs didn't flinch. He was very specific. "You are not authorized to access Mrs. Whitmore." Her voice sharpened, brittle as glass. "That's ridiculous. I'm his wife. I have a right to know what's in it." "I'm afraid not," Briggs replied, sliding a small envelope across the desk toward me. "Inside are the key and instructions for retrieval. You'll need to bring identification, and the bank will coordinate directly with me for verification." Lydia's cheeks flushed crimson. "You can't just hand her Mrs. Whitmore Briggs," interrupted smoothly. "This was your husband's explicit request." The pen clicked again. Click. sounded almost like a period at the end of a sentence Lydia didn't want to read. 3 days later, I stood outside First National Bank clutching my purse like it contained all that was left of my world. The building's glass doors reflected the gray morning sky. I'd never opened a safety deposit box before. My hands trembled slightly as I handed the clerk my ID. "Good morning, Mrs. Whitmore." Mr. Briggs called ahead. "We'll escort you to the vault." The security process felt like something out of a spy movie fingerprint scan, signature verification, then a silent elevator ride to the basement level. The air grew colder, drier. The kind of place where secrets aged well. The vault door loomed before me, circular and gleaming its bolts like clockwork teeth. The security guard inserted his master key while I turned mine. Click. The sound echoed clean metallic final. Inside, rows of identical boxes lined the walls. The clerk guided me to box 712. It was heavier than I expected, and when I slid it onto the counter of the private viewing room, my palms were sweating. "Take all the time you need, ma'am," she said softly, closing the door behind her. The room was small and windowless, just a table, a lamp, and the sound of my own pulse. I took a breath, lifted the lid, and froze. On top lay a handwritten envelope to Mom. "Open only when you're ready." Beneath it were neatly stacked folders, a flash drive, and what looked like years of financial records, color-coded tabs, notes, in Ethan's handwriting. I sat down, my fingers tracing his pen strokes, before I dared to unfold the letter. "Mom, if you're reading this, I've prepared for this moment. I wish I could say this is a surprise, but you and I both know Lydia's talent for performance. I saw what she was becoming. I just didn't know how to stop it without proof. So I started keeping proof. First, the money. You gave us $50,000 for the down payment. I couldn't sleep knowing you'd taken that from your retirement. So I invested it low-risk, high-yield index funds diversified quarterly. I've added to it whenever I could. As of this letter, it's worth approximately $210,000. It's all in your name in a separate portfolio under your Social Security number. The folder labeled Holdings includes the access details and tax forms. Please transfer it to your personal account. It's rightfully yours." My breath caught. $210,000. I kept reading. Second documentation. You once told me, always keep receipts. I took that literally. Lydia's been siphoning funds from our joint account for years. Luxury purchases, false invoices, even attempts to reassign property titles. I hired a forensic accountant to verify. Everything's in the folder labeled evidence. You'll find bank statements, screenshots, and signed authorizations she forged. I've left a full digital backup on the USB drive. I stared at the USB, my pulse steadying. Ethan had known. He'd seen. Lastly, Mom, don't confront her yet. Let her believe she's won. People like Lydia destroy themselves when no one pushes them. Just document everything, and when the time is right, let the truth do the talking. I trust you'll know when that time comes. The letter ended with his familiar slanted signature. I held it to my chest for a long moment, eyes closed, breathing in the faint scent of his cologne still trapped in the paper. When I finally opened the holdings folder, the numbers didn't lie. Transaction after transaction growth charts, Ethan's neat annotations in blue pen. $50,000, $74,000, $121,000, $210,000. Each increase was dated log justified. On the final page, a post-it note read, "See, Mom, I did my math right." Despite the tears, I laughed. A soft, disbelieving laugh that cracked the quiet. "You sure did, my boy," I whispered. "You sure did." Before leaving, I took photos of everything. The letter, the documents, the investment sheets, and stored them in a hidden cloud folder. Old accountants never trust a single copy. As I walked out, the bank manager, Mrs. Peterson, offered a kind smile. "Everything all right, Mrs. Whitmore?" Yes, I said, tucking the envelope into my purse. Better than it's been in a long time. Outside, the sky had cleared. The sun broke through the gray spilling gold onto the sidewalk. Voiceover, Ethan left me more than money. He left me a map, a plan, and a chance to finish what he started. Lydia thought she'd buried the truth with him, but she forgot something crucial. I paused at the car door, looking at the silver key still warm in my hand. The truth doesn't stay buried, especially when it's locked in a box with your name on it. The call came on a Tuesday morning, just as I was finishing my oatmeal and going over Ethan's files for the 10th time. Lydia's name flashed on the phone screen. I almost didn't answer. But curiosity has a cruel way of winning. Maggie. She began, her voice sugary sweet. I think we should talk. Why don't you come for lunch? I made something special. I stared at the phone for a beat before replying. Lunch. That's unexpected. We're family, she said quickly. We should clear the air. Her tone was too smooth, too practiced, like someone rehearsing kindness. When I told Sandra, she nearly dropped her mug. Lunch, she repeated, more like an ambush buffet. I laughed despite myself. Maybe she finally grew a conscience. Sandra raised an eyebrow. Sweetheart, the only thing that woman grows is malice and manicures. Don't eat anything you didn't watch her plate yourself. Relax, I said. I'll survive one meal. Bring pepper spray, she muttered. By noon, I pulled up to the same white house I'd been forced to leave 3 weeks earlier. Everything looked exactly the same. The trimmed lawn, the perfect porch, the fake sympathy wreath still hanging from the funeral. When Lydia opened the door, her smile was so wide it almost cracked her foundation. Maggie. You look rested. Motel air does wonders for the skin, I said calmly. Her smile faltered for half a second. Then she stepped aside. Come in. I made salad and pasta. Ethan's favorite. The name landed between us like broken glass. The kitchen gleamed new appliances. Same old coldness. Lydia poured wine before I even sat down. To new beginnings, she said, raising her glass. I lifted my water instead. To closure. For a few minutes, we ate in awkward silence. She tried small talk, whether charity work, how stressful handling estate paperwork was. I nodded at all the right moments, letting her talk herself into comfort. Then she gestured toward my plate. Do you like the salad? I took a slow bite, then smiled pleasantly. It's creative. Maybe next time you can teach me how to fake sympathy this well. Her fork froze midair. Excuse me. The dressing's good too. I added deadpan, very smooth, almost rehearsed. Lydia blinked, unsure whether I was joking or declaring war. I didn't clarify. When dessert came, she dropped the act entirely. Let's not pretend, Maggie. I know about the box. I looked up from my coffee. The box, don't play innocent. The one Briggs gave you. Whatever's in there, I think we should share it. Ethan would have wanted fairness. I leaned back, crossing my arms. Fairness, I echoed. That's rich, coming from someone who gave me 24 hours to move out. She sighed, slipping into her favorite role, the reasonable widow. Look, I overreacted. I was grieving. We both were. But you have to admit, Ethan's finances were complicated. If there's money involved, it should be handled jointly. Her brother wasn't there this time. She palmed the house keys, then kept talking with her finger still on the lock without witnesses. I studied her carefully, every twitch, every too long pause. Then I reached into my bag and took out a single photo, Ethan at 10 years old, grinning, covered in flour, holding a lopsided birthday cake. I placed it gently on the table between us. He left me something I said quietly that you could never understand. Her smile faded confusion flickering across her face. What's that supposed to mean? You'll see, I said, gathering my purse. But for now, thank you for lunch. It reminded me how much taste comes from honesty. She stared at me as I stood the silence thick with something that wasn't grief anymore. It was fear, dressed as composure. As I walked out, I heard her mutter under her breath, "She's bluffing." Maybe I was, maybe I wasn't. But I knew one thing: people like Lydia always show their hand when they think the game's already over. Voiceover. That lunch wasn't reconciliation. It was reconnaissance. She wanted to test me to see what I knew. What she didn't realize was I had already read every number, every signature, every lie she'd ever tried to hide. I reached my car, looked back at the house once more. Through the window, Lydia stood still, one manicured finger tapping the edge of the photo I'd left behind. She looked nervous, and that was enough for now. He left me more than evidence. He left me direction. And the next move, I said softly, is mine. The next morning, the motel felt unusually quiet. Even the hum of the vending machine outside had stopped. I sat at the small desk by the window, the USB drive Ethan had left me resting in my palm like a secret with a pulse. It was time. I plugged it into my old laptop, the one Lydia once mocked for being prehistoric, and waited as the screen blinked to life. A folder appeared. I clicked. Inside dozens of subfolders, each meticulously labeled, my son had been thorough. Painfully thorough. I started with the folder marked Emails Lydia Evidence. The first one was dated 11 months before Ethan's death, from Lydia Whitmore to Brian Whitmore. Once she's out of the picture, we can refinance everything. The house, the cars, the accounts. Ethan's too soft to say no, but I can handle it. Can't wait till the old lady leaves. My hand tightened around the mouse. Another email followed 2 months later. She still thinks Ethan will repay her someday. Cute. Once the paperwork's done, she won't even have access to the records. Then text messages, screenshots Ethan had saved. Brian. What if she figures it out, Lydia? She won't. She's old. She still writes checks. I couldn't help but laugh, not bitterly this time, but quietly, almost amused. Guess the old lady figured out how to plug in a USB after all. Hours passed as I read. Each file confirmed what Ethan already knew. Lydia wasn't just careless. Her gaze counted chairs, exits then my bag, fraudulent withdrawals, fake signatures, redirected emails, even insurance claim drafts with my name forged as a witness. By the time I reached the folder labeled Audio, my coffee had gone cold. Ethan's voice played through my speakers, calm and weary. Mom, if you're hearing this, I found out Lydia's trying to move funds out of the joint account again. I'm documenting everything. Don't confront her yet. Let the evidence speak when it's time. I pressed a trembling hand to my lips. He'd trusted me to finish this. And I would. That evening, I called Lydia. You should come by tomorrow, I said. We need to talk privately. There was a pause. About what? About Ethan. The silence on the other end was sharp, like she was calculating risk. Fine, she said finally. Noon. The next day, Lydia arrived in all black again. I wondered if she owned any other color. She looked confident, but her eyes darted around the motel room like she'd walked into a trap she didn't quite understand yet. This is charming, she said, looking at the peeling wallpaper. I can see you're adjusting. I am, I replied, opening my laptop. Let's talk about adjustments. Her smirk wavered when the screen lit up folder names in big, bold letters. What's that? She asked. Your greatest hits, I said. Emails, invoices, messages, even voice memos. She froze. You're bluffing. I double-clicked one of the files. Lydia's voice filled the room sharp and impatient. Just transfer it. Ethan doesn't even check the statements. And once his mom's out, I'll switch the accounts to my name. The color drained from her face. She lunged forward, slamming the laptop shut. Delete that. You have no right, relax, I said, sipping my tea. I have backups. You can't. The phone on the table buzzed. I picked it up, put it on speaker. Mrs. Whitmore came the voice. "Carter Briggs here. My father asked me to confirm we've finished notarizing all the digital files. Every timestamp, every attachment has been verified. They're now legally admissible." Lydia's eyes widened. What Carter continued calmly. "We've also filed a notice of preservation with the court, so even if something were to happen to the files, copies exist in secure storage." I smiled. "Thank you, Carter. Of course, ma'am. Mr. Briggs said to remind you, let the paperwork speak." The call ended. Lydia stood frozen, breathing shallow. "You can't prove anything," she hissed finally. "I don't need to," I said, reopening the laptop. "You already did, in writing." Her composure cracked. She slammed her palm onto the table, sending my glass of water flying. It shattered against the wall. "You think anyone will believe you over me," she screamed. "I was his wife." "You were his mistake," I said quietly. Her breath hitched fury and fear, tangling into something wild. "You can't." "You should sit down, Lydia," I interrupted. "It's a long process. Lawyers, auditors, the IRS, they all move slowly. But the thing about truth," I leaned forward, "it never forgets." She stared at me, trembling, then stormed out the door, slamming so hard the motel mirror shook. I didn't move, just exhaled long and steady. Voiceover. That was the moment the balance shifted. For years, she had the power, the house, the money, the story. But now I had something stronger. Proof, facts, math. Ethan once told me numbers don't lie. Neither does a timestamp. I looked at the laptop screen again, the folder still open, Ethan's final voice memo blinking at the bottom. "You did your math right, son," I whispered. "And now it's my turn to do the accounting." The storm broke quietly. No gavel, no shouting, no handcuffs. Just paper, signatures, proof. When truth moves, it doesn't scream at signs. 2 weeks after Lydia's meltdown at the motel, I walked into Briggs & Miller again. The air smelled of coffee and printer ink, the scent of justice in progress. Mr. Briggs looked up from his desk with a calm, fatherly smile. "Mrs. Whitmore," he said, standing. "It's done." I sank slowly into the chair. Done completely. The court reviewed all the materials, the emails, the forged transfers, the notarized timestamps. They've ruled in our favor. Lydia has been officially removed as executor and is under financial investigation. He slid a folder toward me. Inside was a stamped document bearing the seal of the county probate court. Order of removal and financial misconduct determination. My eyes traced each word. Formal, factual, final. "She won't be able to access any of Ethan's accounts," Briggs continued. "Her legal counsel has agreed to a restitution plan for the stolen amounts, and her brother Brian has already fled the state," he said dryly. "But the paper trail leads right back to Lydia. She'll have to answer for every dollar." For the first time in months, I felt my shoulders unclench. "Ethan would have wanted peace," I murmured. "And he got it," Briggs said, "because you finished the work he started." Outside, the spring sun had just begun to warm the streets. The world looked ordinary again. Cars, honking pigeons, pecking crumbs. But for me, everything had shifted. At the bank, I opened a new account. The Lawson Foundation for Honest Workers. The name came easily. Lawson was my maiden name, the name I had before marriage, before motherhood, before Lydia. The clerk, a young man with a shy smile, asked, "So, what kind of foundation is it Mrs. Whitmore one that helps people who've been cheated out of what they earned?" I said. "Workers who trusted the wrong hands with their money, like I did." He nodded respectfully. "That's noble." "How much would you like to deposit?" I smiled, sliding over the certified check $210,000. Ethan's math, Ethan's legacy. Later that afternoon, Sandra showed up unannounced as always with 2 iced coffees and a grin that could light up the dullest room. "Well, look at you," she said, taking in the tidy apartment and my new laptop. "No longer the woman in the motel. You went from homeless to nonprofit boss in what 2 weeks?" I laughed. "Don't say boss. It sounds too corporate. Then what should I call you, Saint Maggie of accounting? How about someone who finally learned not to let liars do her books?" She nearly snorted coffee through her nose. "I'm putting that on a t-shirt." We sat on the balcony, the late afternoon breeze tugging at the curtains. Sandra leaned back, sipping her drink. "You know, most people would have gone for revenge. Pressed charges sued her for everything." "I did," I said simply, just quietly. Through the system she underestimated. She smiled, nodding. Quiet revenge, my favorite kind. That night I wrote Ethan one last letter. "You were right, my boy. Numbers don't lie, but hearts do until they're forced to balance their own books. Lydia tried to erase me, but instead she taught me something priceless. I was never small, just silent. Now I've built something honest in your name. Every dollar you grew will grow again, but this time for someone who needs it." I sealed the letter and tucked it into the same folder where I'd kept his first drawing from kindergarten, a stick figure holding hands with a woman labeled Mom. That one drawing had survived every move, every heartbreak. It would outlive this one too. A week later, Briggs's son Carter called again. "The audit's final," he said. "All Lydia's assets are frozen pending investigation. The restitution fund has been approved. You've officially closed Ethan's estate." "Thank you," I said softly. "You handled this with remarkable composure, Mrs. Whitmore. Not everyone would have done it this way. I used to think dignity was a weakness," I told him. "Turns out it's the sharpest weapon there is." He chuckled. My dad will love that line. The foundation took shape faster than I expected. Small donations came in from Ethan's old co-workers, a few from his students at the finance club he used to mentor. Within a month, we funded our first grant, a program to help elderly workers recover lost pensions. When the first recipient, a retired janitor named George, came to thank me in person, he gripped my hands and said, "People like you remind me the world's still fair sometimes." I smiled through tears. Fairness just needs someone to file the paperwork. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the city skyline, Sandra and I sat watching pigeons scatter across the park. "You think Lydia will ever apologize?" she asked. "No," I said. "And that's fine. Some debts aren't paid in words. So what's next for you, Mrs. Whitmore?" I looked at the sunset, the light catching on the faint silver key, still hanging from my necklace, the one that once opened Ethan's box. "Next," I said, "I'm going to help other people find their keys." She raised her coffee in a toast. To that, my dear accountant, cheers. I clinked my cup against hers. Voiceover. The funny thing about balance sheets is they always tell a story not just of profit and loss, but of choices. Lydia chose greed, Ethan chose foresight, and I chose truth. The kind that doesn't fade even after the ink dries. Maybe I didn't win back the house, but I gained something better, my integrity, my purpose, and a future built on clean books. As night settled, I turned off the lights, leaving only the glow of the foundation's logo on my computer screen. I whispered to the quiet room, "Good night, Ethan. Your math still adds up." The courthouse smelled of dust and disinfectant, that strange mix of bureaucracy and finality. Rows of polished benches gleamed under fluorescent light. Outside, the world was waking up. Inside, time felt suspended. I sat quietly at the back, my hands folded over a single object, Ethan's silver pen. The same one Mr. Briggs had clicked the day everything changed. It felt heavier now, like it had absorbed every truth, every signature, every moment of restraint that led to this. When Lydia entered, she didn't look at me. Her lawyer followed behind, clutching a folder so thick it could have been a doorstop for guilt. Gone were the pearls and designer black. She wore a simple navy suit, understated, almost meek. The judge adjusted her glasses and spoke with calm precision. This hearing will finalize the settlement and close the probate proceedings for the estate of Ethan Whitmore. Her gavel didn't need to fall for the weight of those words to land. Lydia's lawyer stood first, his voice brittle. Your Honor, my client accepts the findings of financial misconduct and relinquishes all claims to the estate. Lydia's shoulders stiffened. She nodded faintly, eyes fixed on the table anywhere but at me. She also wishes to issue a brief statement, the lawyer added. The judge sighed. Proceed. Lydia rose slowly, her face pale, but her chin tilted up just enough to fake dignity. I regret the mistakes that led us here, she said. Things got complicated after Ethan's passing. I was overwhelmed. Her lips shaped sorry. Her eyes stayed dry. Her purse never left her arm, more like a press release. She looked toward me for the briefest second, a flicker of something between guilt and defiance, then turned back to the judge. I hope this brings closure. And just like that, she sat. Closure. The word echoed around the room as if testing its own honesty. Mr. Briggs stood next. His tone was firm, clean, mathematical. Your Honor, the documents provided by Mrs. Margaret Whitmore include incontrovertible evidence of embezzlement and forgery. In accordance with state law, the remaining assets will be transferred to the verified beneficiary, and the restitution plan will remain in place. He turned slightly, offering me a respectful nod. Mrs. Whitmore has also requested that all recovered funds be redirected to a newly formed nonprofit, the Lawson Foundation for Honest Workers. The judge raised her brows. That's admirable. She's quite an accountant, Briggs said, smiling. Even the judge allowed a small chuckle. The gavel finally fell. Case closed. Simple words. My shoulders finally dropped. The breath I'd been holding left the room. Lydia didn't wait. She gathered her things quickly, head bowed, and hurried out of the courtroom. The sound of her heels faded down the marble hallway, click, 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 until it disappeared altogether. For the first time in months, there was no one left to fight. I stayed seated, staring at the empty defendant's chair. It was strange how something so heavy could end so quietly. Sandra squeezed my hand from the next seat over. Well, darling, she whispered, looks like the book's finally balanced. I smiled with interest. Outside, the spring air hit like a baptism, crisp, alive, forgiving. Reporters lingered by the steps, snapping photos of Lydia slipping into a waiting car. None pointed their cameras at me, and that suited me fine. Mr. Briggs caught up as I reached the sunlight. You did it, Margaret, he said softly. You carried this all the way. No, I corrected. Ethan did. I just followed his instructions. He smiled. Then he taught you well. From his briefcase, he pulled out something wrapped in brown paper. He wanted you to have this. I unwrapped it slowly. Inside was Ethan's old silver pen, engraved faintly with his initials, E.W. He signed the addendum with that pen, Briggs said. Said it reminded him of you, meticulous, steady, and stubborn. I laughed, the kind that breaks through tears. He wasn't wrong. I walked to the courthouse steps, sunlight washing over everything warm, golden, absolute. Sandra joined me, coffee in hand. You ready to go celebrate? Not yet, I said, gazing up at the sky. Just one more thing to finish. I pulled out a small notepad and clicked the pen open, that same sharp metallic sound echoing softly in the air. Click. Then I began to write. A check. pay to the order of Community Worker Relief Program amount $25,000 memo for those who earned every cent. I signed at the bottom, steady and sure. He left me more than money, I whispered. He left me proof and peace. Sandra's eyes softened. You know, she said some people chase justice their whole lives. You built it. Justice isn't something you chase, I replied. It's something you account for. We both laughed the kind of laugh that lets the heart breathe again. As we walked down the courthouse steps, I looked back one last time. The sunlight poured through the old glass windows, scattering gold across the marble floor like spilled ink. For a moment, I imagined Ethan standing there in his usual plaid shirt, grinning, the pen tucked behind his ear. You did good, Mom, he'd say. So did you, kid. The breeze carried the faint scent of magnolia. Somewhere nearby, a church bell rang noon, and with that sound, clear ringing final, the story closed. He left me more than money. He left me proof. He left me peace. The camera tilts upward, sunlight bursting through the clouds, painting the courthouse dome in soft gold. If you've ever been underestimated, tell me where you're watching from. Justice may be quiet, but it's never absent.